Yes, you read that right. 34 properties in 12 months. You're about to listen to a story like nothing you've ever heard.
Some of the things unfolded not in the way that I would have expected. It got to the point where we just had to make a decision on it or we're going to lose it.
Most of us are just going to be like, how does this work? Simon Loo, property investor and founder of Housefinder, has built a gigantic portfolio, but it wasn't always like that. Only 15 years ago, he was working in a call center catching the train to work. This episode, we find out how growth works on a massive scale. How does financing work?
I didn't have a pre-approval or anything, but I had to.
What about the second house?
I bought it for $677. It ended up valuing for $900.
Talk to me about making decisions.
You have to learn to expect the worst. It would have became a question of whether I lost $1 million worth of deposit.
22 apartments. That's a big block, Simon. So what's the yield on that then?
About 7.3% rental yield.
That's $16K a week. So you got a bit of market uplift here too.
So if I add them all up in terms of real value, you're looking at somewhere around about the 16 mil mark.
You don't need me to tell you buying 34 properties in a year is insane. The principles and lessons behind it are identical, from buying a 22-unit apartment complex all the way to buying a single house under market value.
I'm pulling equity out of my houses, put them in offset accounts. I'm not paying any interest. It's almost like ammo ready to be deployed.
What's the piece of advice that you can put into action straight away?
Don't focus on.
If you've always been curious about how massive growth works, being open about the business income it takes to build a gigantic portfolio, but also doing it from very humble beginnings, you're going to enjoy this episode. My name's Todd Sloan. This is the Pizza and Property Podcast. This episode is powered by Property Developer Network, Housefinder, and Suburbs Finder. Find out more about our awesome show sponsors and contributors in links below. But right now, you're about to hear a one-of-a-kind story of buying 34 properties in 12 months with Simon Loo. Simon Loo, how has it been? It's been a while.
Todd, how you going?
Good, man.
It's been good. It's been good. Start of the year, been a crazy 2024, personal wise, work wise, property portfolio wise, which is obviously what we're here to talk about.
Yeah, man. You set out to buy, 40 properties?
40 properties.
You ended up with 34. How's it feel to be a failure?
Oh, it's devastating, man. I lie awake every single night thinking about those 6 properties that got away.
Yeah, it must be hard.
No, I'm kidding.
First world problems.
Kidding. Honestly, 34 properties.
It's astonishing.
It wasn't my goal, but at the same time, I always had that in the back of my head, 40, right? But I wasn't going to sacrifice the quality of the deals or the assets I was buying just to hit this
magic number. Yeah.
Right. So setting the goal was important, but making sure I'm getting the right properties is more important.
And just to make sure as well, so we clarify, because I think someone actually said this in the comment section with the last video.
Yeah.
We are talking rentals. So like some of these are blocks of units.
Yes.
And so with those blocks of units, it might be on one title, but there's 9 rentals or 20 rentals or whatever it is.
Correct. Yeah. So it's the kind of asset that I'm buying at my stage of the portfolio, right? So I've got a ton of these 3 or 4 bedroom houses that initially got me passive income to quit my job, and subsequently more of them to facilitate more passive income. But, I'm an opportunist as well. If the right deal comes along with the right parameters, regardless of whether it's a house or a unit block or whatever, I'll still entertain it. I'll still look at it. But the reason why I started buying these units is a couple of reasons. Number one, it's easier. If I were to buy 34 individual contract properties, as you know, it'd be a lot more work. It'd be a lot more intense.
Yep.
The other thing about these unit blocks is they're not like, a lot of people talk about you buying unit blocks, and they're typically some of the older stuff maybe you see in like a regional area, or maybe like a
little 3-pack.
Maybe like a 3-pack or like a bunch of 1 bedrooms. These are decent high value blocks in Sydney. They're only 10 years old. So they're fairly new as well.
And I want to start pulling these apart with you, because the deals are interesting in themselves. And like you're saying, these aren't regional blocks that are, but not that there's anything wrong with that, but there is a very big difference between buying a regional block of 1-bedders and a block of 2-bedroom apartments 15 k's out of Sydney.
Correct. Yeah. And I want to make it very clear that when you get to a certain level in your portfolio where you've got enough equity, enough passive income, and also enough confidence and knowledge and the people around you, that's when you should target what you would consider next level asset types. Because at that point you can do it not only properly, but you can also do it without as much fear, if that makes sense. Right? It's not as daunting. Because I'll be upfront with you, with some of these purchases, I definitely had a few sleepless nights. You know, some of the things unfolded not in the way that I would have expected.
And that's what I want to talk to you about is all those details, because it's one thing to hear this as a high level picture of 34 rentals in 12 months, essentially. It's another to actually start pulling it apart. And I want to actually break this into 3 different sections. So you've essentially broken this into a block of 9 rental apartments, 3 houses that were kind of all bought not at the exact same time, but in pretty close proximity. And then a block of 22 rental apartments.
Correct.
Yeah, that one I'm really interested in. But
that's the most interesting one.
I want to break it into, tell me about how you search when you're looking for stuff like this. Tell me about the negotiation, actually putting the deal together. And finally, how does financing work, man? Because this is not a step-by-step instructional episode. There might be like 2 people in this entire country that are actually watching this being like, yeah, I can implement what Simon's saying. Most of us are just going to be like, how does this work? Well, last time you were on, I think you'd already had the block of 9 rentals. We didn't really go into all the detail of it though, but can you sort of catch us up there, and then we'll go into the houses and then the 22 unit complex?
Sure. So block of the 9 units, some basic specs. There were 7 2-bedroom units and there were 2 1-bedroom units. The building itself was only 10 years old, right? So very, very new block. It was a divorce sale, and it was a messy divorce in the sense that I met the guy, the seller, at the property several times.
That's a little bit unusual already. Well,
he was the one that built it, developed it. And he saw the block as a real labor of love. Right. So from memory, he was a certifier. He owned a certifying business. So he's obviously in the industry. He actually built this block for his wife.
Right.
And there were like,
it's a birthday present that's hard to top.
He had like these ornaments or something in the lobby area. That he designed that was like specific to or symbol of their relationship or his wife or whatever you want to call it, right? So he was explaining that to me. But since they were getting divorced, they were really not into each other at all, right? And it was a situation where the seller or the guy that I was in contact with, he was willing to let it go for almost nothing.
How do you even find that out? Because if you're selling, letting like the buyers know, oh yeah, there's a divorce here. It's not a great thing to do.
A separation. I don't think he was hiding it.
Right.
You know, I first found out from the agent. The agent told me it's a separation. But when I spoke to him, it's really funny. You know, he was mentioning things like, you know, now he was really getting really personal with it. Like he was saying, you know, once this is all over, she's going to find out how hard it's going to be to make a living. And obviously she was maybe like a stay-at-home mum or something all up until this time. And it was almost like he was trying to make it difficult for her. And hence he actually wanted to let it go for, I wouldn't say nothing, but he had no problems letting it go for cheap.
So it wasn't a clean divorce. This was getting messy.
It was getting messy. The wife knew that if after the divorce, she wasn't going to be working, at least for the initial period. So she was quite keen to get the max price so that she can live a better life afterwards. Right. So there was that kind of power struggle. Yeah. But, you know, I initially put in an offer in the 4s. You know, I was the first
4 million.
In the 4 million-ish. I think it was mid 4s. And so I ended up buying this property for around 5.5.
Okay, whereabouts is this in Sydney again? How many Ks out of the city?
This is in Sydney, inner west, about 10 Ks from the city.
Okay, it's a good spot.
So very, very good spot. Very close to the city, close to the metro in Sydney. They're building a new metro line all through the inner west, and good amenities, all that kind of stuff. Walk to everything. It's not right next to like a massive field, massive park as well. So it had a lot of good things going for it. The units were large. They were pretty oversized. So that was a very appealing thing when I went to inspect the properties. And interestingly, the 1-bedders actually were 2-bedders. Now they were...
What do you mean?
You can only advertise them as a 1-bedder because they're only approved as 1-bedders. But when I had a look inside, there were actually 2 bedrooms in them.
Right, just not approved.
Just not approved. So I'm assuming when they design and build the property, that extra room or extra space to fill. So instead of just leaving it blank, they build an extra room. So, I guess you can call it like maybe 1 bedroom plus study.
And is that something you look at that you could potentially get retrospective approval on and increase the value further, or you're not looking at it that way?
I'm not totally interested in that.
Okay.
Whether I get approval to call it 2 bedrooms or not, for me is not really consequential. But even if I were to sell them off individually, anyone who does an inspection and walks through and looks at it, it'd still be worth more than an average 1 bedroom without the extra room. Does that make sense?
Does make sense.
So even though they're not technically 2 bedrooms, they'll still sell for a lot more, probably even close to the 2 bedroom unit prices, right? So I saw that and I go, man, that's a massive bonus. That's going to help with the rent. That's going to help the value and everything. It's worth noting that there's no strata title on it. So
just one title?
Yeah, it's all in one title. And for me, the purpose of these houses, as you recall in earlier episodes, the goal is to get to 2 mil passive income. So these are buy and holds. I'm not trying to split them up. I'm not trying to sell them off individually or anything like that. I'll probably hold on to these for as long as I can, probably 10, 20 years plus. And they're fairly new. So,
they've got the bones for it.
Got the bones for it. Hopefully not too much maintenance.
Can you actually cycle back a little bit further? Because we're talking about the search and there's a divorce. You can see that there's opportunity here. You started around 4 million.
Yeah.
You said you ended up picking up for 5 point, what was it?
I want to say 5.5.
5.5?
Yeah,
okay.
I don't want to be too specific because
That's okay,
I just want to keep it a little bit, yeah.
But tell me, how are you actually finding this in the first place? Are you literally just on realestate.com searching blocks of units, or is these connections off market? Like, how are you finding it?
However way I can. Same as if I were to find any other house. Look, to be fair, a lot of these blocks, very rarely do blocks of units sell off market. It's one of those things where typically you need a proper campaign to sell them, because the amount of people out there buying blocks of units is incredibly small, especially at a high scale.
Yeah.
So anyone who sells them, a lot of agents just don't have, I've got a guy that's got, millions of dollars waiting for these deals or anything like that. I'm sure there is, but both these properties were actually not off market.
Got it.
So they were on market. Just like any inquiry, you check out a bunch of them. This wasn't the first one I saw. I was negotiating. I'm always negotiating, looking at different properties, always looking at anything potential. And, eventually the stars align. You look at the price, you look at the value, you look at the rental, and you go, wow, this is actually something here. So you kind of keep pursuing it. One thing that was that helped me a little bit with this particular property as well was that I was quite familiar with the agent. So they knew how I worked. They knew that I was serious. They knew that I'm not here to mess around. I did end up competing with other offers, which was a little bit frustrating because I paid around 5.5 for it, but my initial offer was like 4.5 or 4.6 or something.
Okay.
And it got to a point where the guy in the divorce, he was willing to take it. And that would have been incredible, right? Heaps, almost $1 million less than what I ended up getting it for. But the wife wasn't on board. She was like, I want to wait longer, because I went in early. As soon when it came up, I was like, okay, here's my offer. Let's get it done.
Saying the difference between 4.5 and 5.5, they're just big numbers on big numbers. Can we talk in some kind of a yield? Like, what's it renting for? Like, how do we look at this as a deal?
Well, that's one other thing that kind of worked in my favor, because the rental at the time was incredibly low. Like I said, this building for this seller, as silly as it sounds, was a labor of love. So he had some of these tenants were in there since the property was built. And, imagine a 2-bedroom unit in 10 Ks from the city in Sydney, renting for $300-400 a week. Right?
Wow, so not just a little bit under rented.
They were that low. So
your yield looked rubbish, but you knew that wasn't the real yield.
Yeah, it took about 6 or so months for me to increase everything to the point where it is today. But currently the rents for the property is $6,900 a week. So $6,900 a week on about 5.5 mil purchase is about 6.5% rental yield.
6.5%, 10Ks from the Sydney CBD.
Yeah, on a near new building. So for me, that's great. For Sydney at least, semi-residential building. Actually, all residential building, but semi-residential asset type, because these blocks of units are considered commercial assets. Renting for that kind of money, for me, it was a bit of a no-brainer. But I think more importantly, when I broke down, I know this is not strata titled, but if I broke down the individual value of each of those units and saw what they were selling for, it was very clear that the 2 bedrooms are worth at the moment probably around 800K each.
Okay.
And the 1 bedroom units, ones that are really actually 2-bedders, they're probably worth about 650 at the moment.
650.
So if I combine those, the value of the building, if I were to sell them off individually, would be worth around about 7.5. So I think, it's from that perspective, I think it's definitely a below market value deal.
And what do you reckon it would cost to actually strata that out?
Look, at the moment, the cost of strataing has gone through the roof.
So like $500,000?
Well, people that I speak to are saying anywhere between 30K to 60K per unit. So, it depends on so many things, how it was built, how, fire rated walls and what's already there.
Yep.
How much modifications you need to make to meet regulations and all that kind of stuff as well.
Because it's a newer build, would that make it easier?
I haven't explored it, to be honest.
Okay.
I was just going, okay, cool, the numbers stack up. I just need to make this work because like I said, my goal is not to split them up anytime soon. In fact, I've got no intention to strata title because once you do that, you start obviously have to pay strata. You have to get a body corporate in. And right now, to maintain this block of units, it's costing me a couple of $100 a month, quite literally. Just clean up the common areas, a bit of light gardening. Whereas, I don't want to, pay those strata fees. Maybe one day if I were to look at selling, I'd probably split them up, but currently just leave it as is.
Well, that's why I was just asking to make sure it's not like there's $2 million there, but it's going to cost you like 1.5 or 2 to do it.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not going to cost you anywhere near it, but you don't have an exact cost because it's not actually the one you're exploring or the option.
I'm not exploring. I mean, however much it costs, it's not going to cost enough to overshadow
$2 million worth.
A $2 million worth of value. But no, I thought it was a good deal. There were other competing offers, but I think I just, I gave them a lot of pressure to sign quickly. My terms was very easy. It was basically unconditional. So I had a guy go in, check out the building, structure of it. This was even before I signed a contract.
Tell me about how building
gave me the okay.
Yeah, how does that work? Because that's not a normal building report.
No, it's not. And to be honest, they weren't that thorough, right? And this is one of those inherent risks, I think, that you learn to take after buying and owning lots of properties. I walked through the building myself very thoroughly. I checked it out in terms of the cracks, and there were a few sort of hairline cracks in the internal walls of some of the units. So that's when I got the engineer out, and he sort of gave me the thumbs up. He inspected it. He did what he had to do, went through each of those units and all that kind of stuff. And because it was such a low price, that was a risk I was willing to take. So I didn't actually do a full-on building inspection on the property, as reckless or as silly as that sounds, because I was under a bit of time pressure to lock this property in. Getting access to 9 units is not easy, right? In one day. So to get this, if I were to do a building inspection, it could have taken weeks, for them to align that. And by then I probably would have lost the deal. So
you're looking at this thinking, even if there are a few problems, you've got it checked enough by an engineer, checked enough by yourself to know that even if I've got to throw 50 grand at this, like I'm fine, but I'm not going to need to spend millions on it because the engineer's checked it.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. And, I think after a while you just get a gut feel, or you learn what to look for to see if there is any perceived major damage. And, the block was built 10 years ago. Usually by that time, if there was anything significantly wrong with the build itself, it would be quite revealing. So, there was zero signs of that. It was a little bit dirty. Some of the common areas were a bit unkept. It was managed by the guy that built it, who, maybe didn't go and, vacuum the common areas or whatever you want to call it as regularly as he should have. But other than that, there was nothing wrong with the building, as far as I could see anyway.
Talk to me about financing a $5.5 million apartment building. How does that work?
Commercial, definitely. It's not resi at all. You do need a decent deposit, at least 30%.
Okay.
I put in a little bit more than that. But other than that, it's the same approval process. Yeah. Everything's a little bit more expensive. The valuation costs a few $1,000s. The insurance is obviously a lot more expensive.
Does it kind of work out the same per unit though?
Yeah, if you break it down, it's not a big deal. It is what it is. It actually works out a little bit cheaper.
Okay.
Than say, if you were to get insurances for 9 separate properties. So, just everything in bulk. It just works out to be lower cost at the end of the day. So I think that's definitely a bonus.
Does financing take longer?
Well, I had a 60-day settlement for this one. It basically took most of it. if not all of it. There was at the very end a little bit of pressure to get it done, but that was only because I went overseas for a few weeks at the tail end, and I was a little bit delayed in signing the loan documents and everything.
And you needed a wet signature?
Yeah, always. And other than that, there was no real other delays, really. It was just normal purchasing.
What was the biggest learning curve for you from this? Because whilst I know you've personally bought, what now, like 50 houses yourself or so, and literally thousands through the company.
Yeah.
What was different enough about this for you to be like, oh, yeah, I'm going to take that learning to the next one?
It didn't feel super stressful. It wasn't anything extraordinary. One of the things I will say is, increasing all the rents within the building needs to be pretty uniform, and they all kind of need to happen at the same time. Because if you're a tenant that just signed up to rent a property for, let's say, $750 a week, you're kind of setting the bar for all the other units, right? And in a small block like this, so, one of the things I noticed when I inspected the property is all the neighbors were very close to each other, not just physically, but you know what I mean? Like they talk to each other and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, they talk. If one person is renting a 2-bedroom unit for $750 and they find out another person's renting the same unit or similar unit for $780, then the tenant in the $780 unit is going to be not too happy about that. Do you know what I mean? So there is that danger.
So how did you handle that then? Because if the leases don't all line up, how do you do everything uniform?
I mean, I had no problems, to be honest, because this area, it has just like most of Sydney, has a bit of a rental shortage. So I just figured out what the market value is for each of those units and just stuck to it, rather than typically if you can't rent, if you put a property online for rent and it doesn't rent for 1 or 2 weeks, you might look at dropping the rent. But rather than doing that, I just stuck to it, knowing if I drop the rent, let's say from $750 down to $720, then I'm setting that bar for all the other units. So the cost of dropping the rent is a lot higher across 9 properties rather than on one property. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because that $30 a week really has a multiplier of 9, so it's actually 270. And I get you.
Exactly. So, that's, like I said, it's one of those asset types where you may need a bigger buffer to weather, a few months of low rent, because it's not like we're not talking about a couple of $100 a week. We're talking thousands. So, you need that buffer. You need to have that stomach, I guess, to be able to do that. And it took about six or 7 months, something like that. I think one of the units is still in a lease on a very low rent. But once that bumps up, then, we should be smooth sailing.
Is there anything else you wanted to add into this one before we move on to the house purchases? Because
no, I mean, it's a pretty, I'm more than happy to say that it was a pretty smooth purchase. There hasn't been any issues. Yeah, smooth sailing for now. Hopefully it stays that way. 3
houses.
Yeah.
It seems odd, Simon. We've got a block of 9, a block of 22, and 3 houses kind of sprinkled in. Most people buying three houses in a year, that's already solid goal kicked. Amazing job.
Yeah.
For this story, it almost seems a little bit out of place. Why these 3 houses?
Opportunity, man. Honestly, I don't wake up in the morning thinking, I'm going to go off and buy a house or anything like that. So just to explain a bit about how these houses came about. One of them is in WA. 2 of them were in Queensland. The first one needed to settle in cash, and it needed a really short settlement, right? And when I say short, I settled in 10 days. So, it's not easy to find. Well, at the time, I literally had no one that could buy that property from a work perspective, from a business perspective.
Because I remember you saying in the last episode, it was like you didn't really want the houses because it was like, no, that's what you do for the business. You were concentrating on the blocks of units.
Yeah, exactly. But, at the end of the day, I'm an opportunist. So if the right opportunity comes along and no one can buy it because of these parameters and I can, then I'm like, okay, cool. Rather than seeing the deal go, I'll go for it.
Got it.
So that one was $490,000 and yeah, rent is around about the $600 a week, and it's a 4-bedroom house.
Whereabouts?
Smaller block. It's in WA.
Okay.
It's in one of those sort of newer estates, and a property where the land size wasn't massive, but the numbers stacked up. I've already got a lot of equity in it, so yeah, happy days.
So renting for around 600, bought it for 490.
It's rented for 650.
650, sorry.
Bought it for 490.
Yeah.
So decent yield so far.
And so what do you reckon it'd be worth now?
Valuation, maybe around about the 600K mark, 620, something like that.
So you're like 110 under
Yeah.
straight away. Yeah. Okay.
It's a pretty standard type of deal that we would find from the business owner, so from House Finder, but only because of the odd sort of, seller requirements. I didn't have anyone to buy it, to be honest.
And what was 10-day settlement? That is unusual.
Yeah.
Like what were they, is it like a death or is it divorce again or like?
I think it was, if I remember correctly, it was required to get that price. If I wanted a normal settlement, which in WA is 42 days, they would have just sold it to someone else, obviously at a higher price point. You know what I mean? But because I was able to move quickly, I managed to get it. I forgot what the situation was. This was very early on in the year.
But obviously enough to take that much of a haircut.
Yeah.
Like they wanted it that badly.
Yeah, correct. So this is, genuine distress seller, just slipped my mind exactly what the reason was. To be honest, once you get a feel for the price, you kind of don't really need to know the reason. A lot of people get stuck on, why are they selling it so cheap, right? Sometimes it's best not to ask questions, especially if something is cheap enough, because you think to yourself, it doesn't really matter. You're doing the due diligence anyway. You're finding out if the house is run down or if it, if there's something wrong with the title or, something that's making them sell that cheap. So it's best just to assume that there is a real urgent situation and also assume that maybe there's something wrong with the house. You know what I mean? Because what the agent tells you sometimes is complete rubbish anyway. Maybe they'll just make up a reason as to why they need to sell it cheap. But yeah, no, it was a good quick deal. So yeah, I ended up buying it.
All right. So what is that rental then? Number 10 after a 9 block of units. What about the second house, number 2?
So second house, Queensland. I bought this one because it needed quite a bit of work, right?
How much?
I ended up spending about 20K on it. But 20K as a needs must reno is quite a lot in my world.
Because you don't like renovate much, do you?
I don't do renovations typically.
So I said 20K is just a cleanup in my head.
This is like the numbers stacked up quite well in this particular situation. When I say 20K, for a normal person doing a renovation, it may have cost them 40, right? But I kind of know my trades because I've got quite a few properties in Queensland. I kind of only got this property renovated to a point where it was livable, rentable, clean, safe and tidy.
Got it. Okay.
No bells and whistles. So this house had big problems.
Yep.
Actually, I wouldn't say like major structural problems, but it needed quite a bit of work. It was inside was pretty trashed, right? So that's why I ended up going for that. And I got it at a decent price, but after doing a bit of work, it valued extremely high. So I bought it for 677, and it ended up valuing for 900 after probably about 6 months or so, and probably about 6-7 months, something like that.
What's the rent for?
680 a week.
680 a week. So your yield's not as good, but
yield's not good. Yeah,
but your equity is awesome.
Correct. Yeah, they needed these guys also needed a quick turnaround as well. So it wasn't your standard 6-week settlement. It wasn't 10 days, but I think it was like somewhere around 30 days or something like that. I had no finance condition because again it was a cash deal. Yeah. So a lot of things put together, and also I couldn't do an inspection. No, again,
they actually said you can't do one.
No, it's as is, right? So if you want it for this price, which was a bargain, it is what it is. So I just sent a guy out, not a building and pest inspector, but just one of my guys out, checked it out, noted down everything that needed work, and I took that into account, and then I just went for it. I guess the risk there is, if there was any structural issues, I wouldn't have known about it, but it was at that point probably a risk I was more than happy to take.
All right, so this is why you're not giving this to a client, a property like this, because this is the kind of thing that whilst you've done well out of it, you could also do really badly if it turns out there was a big problem.
There would be a significant risk to this.
Yeah.
I mean, 99% of my clients would not buy a property that has been visually trashed without the ability to do a building inspection.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's not something I would recommend. In fact, most of them wouldn't even entertain it. Right. So yeah, but for me, it's definitely a risk I was willing to take. So yeah, that's why I ended up going for it.
Something I was going to say before was, as much as I said that this isn't really an instructional episode, there's still absolutely takeaways within this, because the biggest thing that I'm really hearing right now is whether you're buying a block of units or whether you're buying a property, you're getting these deals because it's speed, it's quick, it's cash, and whilst when you're at the very, very beginning, and you remember this, when you're in your early 20s, or for myself, I started in my early 30s, you don't have heaps of cash. But the more of it that you can get behind yourself and the more solid you can be in your finance, the more you can start going, yeah, I can move forward. Yeah, I can do this quickly.
Yeah.
And you can still do this on smaller scales.
Yeah, 100%. Look, I think it's more of a mental thing. I think a lot of people have a fear when they watch current affairs and they see and read all these stories about buying a house and suddenly it's falling apart the next day from a completely irreparable states, that kind of a thing. You know, after you buy and own properties long enough, you know that it can only be that bad, right? Pending like major footing issues or, you know, subsidence and all this kind of stuff. You know, roofs, walls, hot water tanks, fences, everything has a cost, right? So when you look at it, you learn to look at it very objectively. Cool, you know, let's say I anticipate this house to cost me $50K as a worst case scenario to get everything up to scratch, right? And I'm getting a deal for a specific price. Do I really care? You know, is it a risk I want to take? It could be 50 or it could be nothing. It could be just 10 or 20K or 15K worth of cosmetic, you know, issues. So it's not something I would recommend because, especially if you're starting out, because it is quite daunting.
Yeah.
I mean, if some of you saw the condition of the house, you'd freak out, right?
Can we get some photos? Do you have anything you can send through?
I probably,
Yeah?
probably, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's chuck them on screen because I'm curious. You and I were story swapping about rubbish places that we've been through, but I haven't seen this one yet.
Yeah. I'll try and find some pictures and I'll send them across to you.
Okay.
But, you know, it's okay. So, yeah, the seller was in a bit of an odd mental state, put it that way. There were kind of graffiti and, you know, holes and stuff
Real
in the
bad.
walls and things like that. And, you know, it was neglected, put it that way. But, you know, at the end of the day, if the price is right, just go for it.
and talk to me about this. Like the price is right, 677, 900. So there's like 230 something K in that.
Yeah.
Is this like a formula that you go, okay, my estimate of worst case scenario is I spend 100K, so I need to get at least double that, or is there some kind of a way you work this?
So at the time when I did the vals, like when I looked at the comparables, I remember it was probably like in terms of real value, probably worth about 800.
Okay, so you got a bit of market uplift here too.
Yeah, so there was been a bit of growth in this particular suburb. So if you look at it that way, if I got it for 677 and the value was, you know, at the time around 800 and I potentially had to spend 50K to do it, a lot of people would write that off as like, no, it's too hard basket. We can just buy a normal house that doesn't need a lot of work and still get a similar type of equity, right? But, you know, it was just at the time I was opportunistic, you know, I had the funds ready. So, yeah, it needed a quick sale and I just jumped on it. I didn't really think too much about it, to be honest. As reckless as that sounds, I mean, sometimes it's just the way it works.
It's like there's enough meat in the sandwich. Let's go.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, that was that one.
All right. Talk to me about number 3.
Okay, so this was another house, again, in Queensland. Ended up buying it for $570.
And just quickly, we're talking Brizzy, Logan, Ippy, whereabouts are you?
It's in Brisbane.
Brisbane, okay.
It is in the Logan area. The rent was $600 a week. We did a valuation very recently. So, you know, let's say the start of 2025. And the bank valuation came back at $750.
And what'd you get it for?
$570.
$570.
Yeah. So this was a property that needed a very, very quick turnaround in terms of not necessarily the conditions, or it needed to settle quickly, but it just needed a decision to be bought very quickly. So I remember presenting this to a buyer. You know, he was umming and ahhing about it, you know, as you should, you know, trying to find out more about the property, not understanding perhaps the urgency, even though I was like, hey, we need to get back to this guy ASAP.
I'd imagine you get people a lot of the time just going like, you're just trying to get me to make a decision.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's a fine line between enforcing the urgency or relaying the urgency and coming across as too much pressure, too pushy, right? And I totally understand how people may not be able to make a decision within 30 minutes or an hour. You know, that's something that takes a lot of time to get yourself to that point where you can make those types of decisions very quickly, and also takes, I guess, a lot of commitment to do it. And 99% of buyers, especially when you're starting out, they don't want to make that leap, right? Especially, hey, I just sent you this deal. I need to know right now within 30 minutes, right? So, you know, said this to the buyer. He was kind of somewhat, umming and ahhing about it, even though it was a good deal. A lot of our clients, which rightly so, they question things like, oh, is it a good area? Is it going to grow? It's grown already. This area has gone up a lot, right? So when a lot of people look at that, they get a little bit jaded. They're like, oh, is there growth left? All this kind of stuff. But it got to the point where we just had to make a decision on it, or we're going to lose it. Right.
What kind of time frame are you talking? Hours, days, what?
This was hours.
Okay, so this is real time
Legit,
pressure.
Yeah. And a lot of this is real, right? So I know a lot of people are probably thinking, oh, it's just agents trying to get you to sign on the dotted line. Like some of these agents we've bought dozens and dozens of properties off. So we know how they work. We know whether they're talking BS or not. And I knew that this was legit. So, I gave the guy, look, I told the client, if you don't come back to us within this time, we're going to lose the deal. Are you prepared to lose this deal if that were to happen? And he was like, look, I can't make a decision this quickly. I need time. I need to do my research properly, blah, blah, blah. I need at least two, I forgot what it was, but at least a day or two or something like that. And we would have just lost it. So I was like, look, most likely, it's probably going to be gone by then. So yeah, that was how that transpired.
Yeah, right. Okay. Talk to me about making decisions. Is this something that you've just always been someone that's like, it's a part of who you are? I can just make quick choices? Or is this something you had to slowly get comfortable with too?
You have to slowly get comfortable with it, and you have to learn to expect the worst, right? So yeah, it is something you have to learn. And even now it freaks me out, to commit hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars on a property that you don't know very much about. And you're just relying on your knowledge, your gut instinct, you're relying on just purely numbers. The other thing I would say is, if you get it wrong, you can't blame anyone but yourself. Do you know what I mean? So a lot of the times when you make these decisions, they can go your way in the sense that, yes, it didn't actually need that much work. But if it does go wrong, as in, I bought it without a building and pest inspection, but it needed it, after the fact that I bought it, it needed $20,000 for a new roof, right? I can't go, how dare the agent, suck me into this. Like, you got to own it.
Yeah.
Right. And I think a lot of people don't. A lot of people look at pointing, whether it's to the building and pest guy or to the agent or whoever it is, to go, hey man, why didn't you tell me this? I bought this house, now I've got to spend blah, blah, blah. So I think it's about, focusing on the bigger picture, going, okay, like you said, if I'm buying this for a particular price point, I don't really care if I have to spend 20, 30K on it. If worst case scenario, there is a big issue, I'll just cop it on the chin and then move on. Yeah. Right. So it is a bit of a risk from that perspective, but the risk is absorbed in the price that you pay.
So for anyone that says you've just got lots of money behind you and you're taking big gambles that most people can't afford, what would you say to that?
Honestly, I would say there is some truth in it. I can't deny that. Like, it's, at the end of the day, I would say the gamble is not just about how much money you have. Just because you got lots of money doesn't mean you take stupid risks. But the stupid risk component has come from experience.
Okay.
Of buying and owning a lot of these type of houses, knowing pretty much everything that can go wrong. I don't think there is one thing in a house that has gone wrong that I haven't experienced yet.
So is it a stupid risk then? Or is it a calculated risk? It's
a calculated risk based on experience, right? It's not a calculated risk if you don't have experience, because you just simply don't know how to calculate it.
Okay.
A large part of the calculation can only be done just because you've gone through that property journey of dealing with a lot of surprises, things that can go wrong, and a general knowledge of how properties work.
Yeah, you remember when your first hot water service died and you were like, what do I do here?
It's the worst. Yeah. Like, at the time, if it cost you $1,000 or $2,000, for most people, all they're thinking is, well, this week I guess I'm working for free.
Yeah.
If you're getting paid $2,000-3,000 a week in your day job, but if you're talking 30, 40, 50 grand, that can literally devastate someone, from a financial perspective. So you need to have the buffer, you need to have the capital, and you need to have the knowledge as well.
So, and financing for these, we're talking all this is just cash?
These were just cash buys.
Yep.
So, I would, because they all had to move fairly quickly, I didn't have a pre-approval or anything, but I had the funds sitting in the offset accounts. So I just pulled the trigger, and after the fact, I would refinance them and pull out the equity that way. So I'm getting a loan on the back end, But just for the purpose of securing them quickly, or your ability to secure them quickly, you need to have the cash available, which very few people would have unless they've got a very established portfolio already. So it's another benefit, I guess, if you have that ability to do it.
And when you're saying cash, you mean like you've got a pool of equity kind of sitting there, or this is just like no savings, or?
Yeah. So all the time I'm pulling equity out of my houses.
Yeah.
Right. I don't leave them in the house. When I pull out equity, I put them in the offset accounts. I just leave them in offsets. I'm not paying any interest on them, but it's almost like ammo ready to be deployed.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if the right deal comes along, I can strike, like these houses.
I love the smell of equity in the morning.
Honestly, it's a very similar analogy, right?
Yeah.
You know, like you got to be able to move quick. So, you know, with the equity sitting there, I had the ability to do that. So, yeah.
Okay. Anything else you want to talk about as far as these deals? I feel like we've already talked about the negotiation side, which really, it sounds like every single one of them came down to speed and calculated risk. You were taking a risk, but like you said, this has been on decades? Is decades now? Almost.
I bought my first house when I was 26. I'm 39 now, so more or less.
Almost, yeah. Let's just say lots of experience.
Years, something like that.
Lots of experience. And then being able to purchase with cash, pull out the equity later, but it's really about that ability to move quick.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, speed is very, very important. I mean, it's just like anything in life. If you need to sell something quickly, if you have a genuine reason behind you, quite often getting the absolute highest price is not your priority, right? Especially if you've got a guy that's got cash willing to give it to you, and you can take it immediately, and it makes your life easier. And you think to yourself, okay, cool. Yes, I know that I'm not getting the highest price here, but I'm alleviating myself from these other perspectives, and a lot of people will go for it. So yeah, a lot of sellers anyway.
What is it? Good, fast, and cheap. You want all three, but you only ever get two.
Good, fast, and value.
Good, fast, and value.
I don't like to use the word cheap. Nothing is ever cheap, but if it's good value, go for it.
22 apartments. That's a big block, Simon.
Yeah, this one was a very interesting property. It's probably one that's caused me the most stress. So this particular block, it was from a syndicate of, shall I say, builders, right? Okay. They know each other. They're all part of the same family. But according to the agents, they have a bit of a falling out, and it's between three people.
How are you finding that out?
The agent's telling me.
How are you getting agents to tell you this stuff?
The same way that I get agents to tell us about the situations of all our houses. Just engage them properly, ask the right questions, talk to them, that might be a full-on episode that we'll do to find out how agents give you this info. But it was one of those situations where one party really wanted to sell, but the other two didn't. And there was a lot of back and forth negotiation. I started with the offer at the 9s.
And I'm assuming they couldn't buy the other one out. Like that's why it was like
they had to sell it. Yeah. So it was, the property ended up being around about the $11 million mark. I started off at the $9 million mark, and it was a lot of back and forth with the agent. The seller apparently wanted close to 13 for the property.
Right.
But at 13, it wasn't feasible for me anyway, right? I wouldn't have bought it at that point. So again, I was just like, whenever I go into these negotiations, I almost expect that I'm not going to get it, but it's worth punting anyway, right? So then I went from 9 and it just went incrementally up. They came down a little bit. They got to a point where it was completely, their bottom line, which ended up being, I won't say the specific number, but around about the 11 mil mark. And then I threw in a bunch of other things going, okay, cool. The property, again, no strata. So it was on a single title. It only had one meter reader, so the water meter. So I was like, okay, cool. I'll give you this price that we ended up negotiating on, that they were happy to accept. But I want the
separate meters. Yep.
I want the property was a little bit more neglected than the 9 block.
How old?
So yeah, around about 10 years old. The property itself, structurally, it looks great. There was no issues, but internally it had a few cosmetic wear and tear, should I say, because it was owned by this consortium of builders. They're obviously, fighting with each other, or they're not too happy with each other. So a lot of these common areas, they're just left unkept. No one's gonna put up their hands and go, oh, I'm gonna clean that common area. I'm gonna fix this. I'm gonna fix that. So there were a few little things that needed a bit of attention, but overall nothing major. Again, I anticipated around about $50,000 to get everything up to scratch. Probably not going to be anywhere near that, but fixed the water meters, and finally we got a deal. So we signed it. Again, it was a risk because it was a 66W, which means it was unconditional, right?
It's no cooling off, yeah?
No cooling off, 90-day settlement, right? It is what it is. Now, one of the things that I did, a lesson that I learned, I suppose, was assuming that the valuation process would be pretty straightforward as per all these other deals. Now, after I bought it, apparently unit 22, which was at the very top, it was a little bit murky in terms of whether it existed or not,
What do
or
you
there
mean?
was approved, right?
Isn't it either approved or it's not?
That's what I thought, right? So then I asked the selling agent, hey, can you produce some plans? You know,
Yeah.
I want the valuer wants to see the plans because he must have saw the plans on these valuers. They've got access to, you know, what's on record, what's on title, what's at council. And it states that it's only 21 units, right? So that kind of got me thinking, okay, what's going on with this 22nd unit? Apparently they went through, it wasn't approved because they were trying to get it through as a 3-bedder. And after it was all, the whole building was approved, he had to go to court, and he went through this whole sort of court process to get this last unit approved, right, as a 2-bedder.
Okay.
So it did exist, and apparently the court order did exist. But because these sellers they didn't have much records of anything, which I still find quite hard to believe when you build I mean, these guys built it. So whatever you build, you have the plans, you have everything stored somewhere. But they weren't coughing it up for whatever reason, right? They were very uncooperative in trying to get the deal done. And I couldn't get a valuation without this. So I had to hit up council, ask them for the plans. I had to get the seller to sign a release for the council to release those plans to me. That took weeks. Finally, one of them was happy to do that. The one that was keen to sell, he just signed it. When I got the plans, they were incomplete. I then had to go to the architect that the seller engaged and asked them to check their files and check their history to get these plans out. That took a long time because the guy that ran that architect firm was living in Dubai at the time. So like all these little things, and it was just creeping closer and closer and closer. And even though I had 90-day settlements, that was eaten up very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And by this point, I still had no valuation. And if you can't get a valuation, you can't proceed with a purchase.
What's your deposit?
Put in 10%. So it was over $1 million.
So you're risking literally $1 million now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct. Like I didn't realize that this would be a problem because I had my finances, my finances were good. I could have easily, bought this property from a finance perspective, but it was just this valuation bottleneck, which confused everybody. It confused me, it confused the valuer, it confused the solicitor, it confused the mortgage broker. Like they've never encountered something like this. And, right at the very last second, I managed to get all the docs in line. We got the court order, we got the plans. The property, the unit 22, I knew it existed because I saw it, obviously. The guy living in it was a bit of a recluse. So I couldn't get access until the very last second, but finally I did. And what I actually found was this massive unit. It had 300 square meters of balcony space, like external living space.
It's massive.
It's huge because it's basically half the roof of the building.
Yeah.
Right? Penthouse views, beautiful views because you're high up now.
So it wasn't a standard 2-bedroom unit?
It wasn't a standard, but it was approved.
Okay.
Right? So I just thought, okay, cool, this is amazing. Right? I need to buy this. Well, this is an extra incentive to buy because I've got this penthouse like property that's worth over $1 million alone. It's not like a standard 2-bedroom unit, which would have been worth about $730,000 each. But this would have been worth well over $1 million.
Okay.
Because it had all that space and the views and everything. So
why aren't they telling you that at the beginning? Because surely that's the thing to push your price up higher, to be like, nah, you see the one on the top,
it's
mate.
really it's very murky, these sellers. I kind of realized this because I had a look at the history of the building, and they tried to sell it multiple times within a relatively short time frame.
Okay.
I'm assuming every time they tried to sell it, maybe one of the other parties were like, no, I don't agree, right? So, finally we got there. And then another problem came about where, we needed the land tax, we need the rates and all this kind of stuff. And then I asked the seller or the selling agent, and again, they didn't know anything about it. And, again, more sus. And then it just felt like that they were trying to get me to default on settlement to keep my deposit. That was the notion that I was getting, right? Because who doesn't have their last land tax bill? It would have been sent to you at the most 12 months ago. So similar with water bills, similar with council rates and things like that. But, you know, we managed to get them through council. So all these little things, little hurdles that I had to go through to get the deal done.
Would there have been any legal recourse that you could have pushed back on to be like, I would have settled if you supplied what you needed to supply, or?
No, because there was no condition. It was unconditional. It was 66W, take it as is. You know, I had a few conditions in there, like fix up the water meters and also a few little other things to be fixed up.
Yep.
If those conditions weren't met, then I would have had a recourse to be like, okay, well, I'm not settling then.
Were you just going to run out there with a spanner and undo the water meters?
Maybe if it came to it, honestly, you know, it was right at the last second that we got approval and finally got it done. You know, it's relatively fresh, you know, relatively early stages. So, okay, another characteristic of this property was that 11 of the units was privately rented by the owners.
Okay.
Right. So they have family or friends just living in there. So there was a lot of just not...
Like handshake agreements?
Yeah, handshake agreements. They're all out. You know, now I have to fix up some of the common areas, and some of these units need, you know, extra little doorknobs and things like that need to be fixed, little things like that. But overall, look, 22 units, 11 mil, not 11 mil on the dot, but around about 11 mil. There was 18 two-bedders. So that's $730,000 each based on current value, very, very conservatively. That puts it at around 13.1 mil on the two-bedders alone. There was 3 one-bedders. These were very large one-bedders. They didn't have 2 bedrooms like the 9-block unit, but they were very, very large. And also these one-bedders had their own courtyard. So they were ground level, had its own courtyard. So they were oversized. I'd say conservatively 500K each. The house at the top, or not the house, the penthouse type unit, like I said, I would value that very conservatively at $1 million. But I reckon if I were to actually cut these up and sell them individually, I'd probably get closer to around 1.5, you know, based on how large, like expansive this balcony was.
300 square meter balcony, that's pretty big.
This tenant actually had bikes, you know, those electric bikes, like a lot of them. I think he may have sold them or something.
Small racetrack up there.
Yeah, it was just riding around. It was insane. It's like the rooftop of a massive building at the end of the day. So anyway, that ended up being a big bonus. So if I add them all up in terms of real value, you're looking at somewhere around about the 16 mil mark. So the fact that I bought it for around about 11 mil, I think, you know, despite a few hairy moments, I think ultimately it was worth it.
Do you wonder, and I feel like I already know the answer to this question, it's going to be no, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you wonder why they don't just strata them out? Because it's not like, oh yeah, they could have got 13 and I got it for 11. That's already pretty amazing. Yeah. But they could have got 17 and I got it for 11. Like, and what's it going to cost to strata it all out? Maybe $1 million? Like it's...
Look, I think for these particular sellers, like if what I'm hearing is true, that they're, you know, sort of not getting along with each other, it would have been an even bigger nightmare because they own them all collectively, right? So if you start cutting them up, and it becomes a question for them is, okay, who owns what? You know, how do we split this? Even the process of doing the strata title and everything could, you know, maybe too hard basket for them because I'm sure they'd all have to agree on how things are done and, you know, who to sell, how to sell them, all that kind of stuff. That
maybe it's just me, but I don't know if any basket's too hard if I'm getting 6 million out of it.
Well, you know, according to the agent, these guys are big shot builders, developers. They've got all these other projects everywhere. They need the capital to buy more land, blah, blah, blah. I don't know if any of it was true.
Yep.
Again, it was a case of maybe don't ask too many questions.
Just keep going.
Just keep going.
Yep.
But I genuinely got the sense that they were trying to screw me over a little bit. And this is probably a big lesson for me, without a bit of any kind of arrogance as well. If push came to shove, right up until settlement, I kind of expected things to go extremely bad. And it would have became a question of whether I lost $1 million worth of deposit or more than $1 million worth of deposit or complete the purchase with cash, right? And I know that sounds ridiculous, but coming back to how I bought those 3 properties with cash, the 3 individual houses, I immediately got those refinanced, got the equity out sitting there.
Yeah.
I also had a bunch of equity just sitting there as well in various offset accounts. So if I really had to, like, you know, I would have squeezed in a cash settlement if I had to, and then just refied out of it afterwards.
So let's just clear something up. So you never sit on a portfolio with equity just kind of chilling there?
No, it's always in offset accounts.
Always. So as soon as you can pull it out, it's gone. Yeah. Okay. So when I refinance,
yep,
I'll do the same thing. Okay. I don't do it to the tune of 11 mil. Okay. Obviously you and I have different size portfolios. What I want to know though is, does it work any different? Because I'll pull out equity and then I'll pop it in an offset. So I'm not paying interest on it. So it's ready to go.
Yeah.
Do you have to sort of split it up against all different ones? Do you do this like refinance every 6 months to keep pulling everything out? Like, how does it work?
I mean, every now and then, if I sense that I've got properties with equity in them, I would just hit up my broker, which is Michael Shah. He's been on this show a couple of times, and he would just go through the refi process. I get the equity out. Whatever equity I get, I just park it in the offset account against the same property. And it's just sitting there, until I want to use it. A large part of my strategy is to build the passive income. Having that kind of equity offsetting multiple properties. Another purpose of that is just to maintain that passive income coming in. But at the same time, like I said before, if there's a cracking deal that comes along, it's ready to be deployed, right? So it's no different. Like, I'm not pulling out 10 mil worth of equity from one house, right? If a property has a couple of $100,000 here, a couple of $100,000 there, this and that, it all adds up. So they're all spread in multiple offset accounts at the end of the day.
So you didn't achieve your exact goal, but like you said at the very beginning, it was more important to actually get the right properties rather than achieve the number of 40.
Yeah. I mean, if I have a look back at these properties, like, they were all good deals.
Yeah.
Right. These are properties that if I had to sell them, if I had to cut them up and sell them off individually, they'd be fine, right? But once I get these 22 units up and going, the rental income will be around about the 16K a week mark in total.
So what's the yield on that then?
It works out to be about 7.3% rental yield.
So 16K a week, so 7.3. That's phenomenal for where you are.
Maybe slightly more ownership costs because this particular property has a lift.
Yep.
But somewhat inconsequential, at the end of the day. So, that's one of the benefits of buying these types of properties. There is a lot of risk involved. You need a lot of backing in terms of capital. You need to have the appetite for when things go wrong. And it was almost at the point where it would have been pretty disastrous. So obviously, if there's a good enough upside, then happy days. Total value of the properties that I bought in the past 12 months will be somewhere around about the 19 mil mark across these 34 properties. So
what's the whole portfolio sitting at now as a total?
I actually don't know, man, to be honest with you. I haven't really revisited it since about 12 months ago. Some of them have gone up quite a bit as well organically. But no, it was, crazy year, a lot of lessons learned, a lot of, touch and go moments. But yeah, even though I didn't get to my 40 at 34 properties, I'm still pretty stoked with that results. And, I've got even bigger, maybe similar ambitions this coming year as well to hopefully get myself to 2 mil passive. At the end of it all. So excited to see what's to come.
Mate, it's absolutely incredible. For anyone that's been listening to this and like they want something to put into action, they're at the start, okay? Because like I said, not many people are going to be listening to action right now, but they want to set the world on fire. They want to do what you've done. What is probably the most important thing that if you could go back to 18, 19, 20-year-old Simon, what's the piece of advice that he can put into action straight away?
Don't focus on getting millions and millions of dollars worth of deals or passive income even. Just focus on milestones, right? So focus on the first milestone, which may be 50K passive or 100K passive, right? Enough to maybe get you to work less or quit your day job. After that, based on your journey or based on what's important to you at that point in time, look at how you're going to get to your next milestone, which may be 500K of passive income or $1 million of passive income. And the way to do that is maybe to start a business. But because at that point you've got enough time and resources to actually focus on building a business properly. So once you do well in business, you make more money, put more money in that property. And then when you get to a certain point and you're looking at commercial property or you're looking at development sites or blocks of units like this, do it properly. Don't buy the little, like even these unit blocks, I avoid the ones that are $1 million or $2 million even because I know the value is a lot less. Because you get less units, but also there's more competition, right? So at this end of the market, once you start to buy these types of assets properly, it's a lot quieter and you get better deals, you get better returns. Do you know what I mean? So, a lot of people I find jump into or try to jump into these blocks of units and they end up with some regional, bed sits you know, and
So roll one betters.
yeah, they don't look. They might have great yields, but only if you can keep them rented over a very long period of time. But generally speaking, they also don't tend to grow very much. Yeah, you know, I think just doing things properly. Don't run before you walk. You know, just because there's lessons learned in that first 10 properties to get to your 50K or 100K, and then to get from 100K to 500K, there's lessons learned there. The resilience you learn, the knowledge, or like the ability to take the risks that I took, to be able to stomach it, to be able to move quickly. Like, you only get that from experience. You can't really push yourself to do that. Otherwise, it would probably end up biting you back.
So if you don't feel comfortable getting the first few properties, like basically don't even look at the stuff like this. This is about building that foundation first.
Yeah.
Getting the first milestone goal, like you're saying, 50K passive, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Even if it's not the thing that allows you to actually walk away from work.
Yeah.
To me, the big thing that I take away from what you're saying here is maybe it's the thing that just gets you to switch that side of your brain to go, this is doable. And if this is doable, that means that's doable.
I think it's comfort zones. You know, like when you buy your first house, you're uncomfortable, you're stressing out. But once you buy it and once it's settled and it's all done, you're thinking, okay, what's next? Right? Because you've experienced that already. And then you buy your second property, it's much less stressful because you've already done it. And then when you maybe buy 2 properties at once, that's a new level of discomfort, you know. But once you go through that process and everything's done, then you just learn from that, right? That becomes normal. Once you deal with a bad tenant, once you deal with a long vacancy period, once you deal with some big maintenance or things that can go wrong with houses, you learn from it. You kind of create a thick skin, and you just build this over time so that, you know, like if you ask me when I first started buying properties to be able to buy 22 units and potentially lose $1 million worth of deposit, or because the seller couldn't come up with a council rate, like that would unfathomable. You know what I mean? So you kind of have to just work your way up slowly.
Simon, I'm looking forward to checking in again another time, mate. The stories are going to get more insane. I can already tell. You're going to be buying Eureka Tower soon.
How'd you know that? Who told you about that deal?
And I think we might be going out for dinner later. Depends on how the rest of the day unfolds, mate. But I don't know if we're going for pizza or not. But I do need to ask you a question. I've asked you before.
Yeah.
But again, now in 2025, Simon Loo, right now, what is your favorite pizza?
Well, I've taken the liking to meatball because
Meatballs on your pizza?
Yeah. There's a local pizza joint near where I live, and they do they call it Mama's Meatballs. Yeah. Okay. And the reason why I like it is because my kid likes it.
Okay.
So now I have to eat it. When you have kids and your kids like to eat something, it suddenly becomes your favorite food. So,
well, right now Freddie just likes formula, so I don't think we share that passion just yet. But
know if there's formula pizza. Not sure if that's legal.
I haven't had any carry care on it.
Yeah. Sprinkle it on top.
Might taste like cheese. I mean, I'm not close to the idea, but I'm not excited about it.
Maybe you found something there. I don't know.
Simon Loo, this has been an episode that we're not going to be replicating anytime soon, mate. You've got a unique story and have done ever since the very first time you and I spoke.
Yeah.
It just keeps getting more and more unique, more and more incredible. But is there any kind of final words of wisdom you'd like to leave with everyone today, mate?
No, not really. Watch this space, I guess. Hopefully I'll be here next year with a couple more under my belt. As you know, I've got a goal to get to 2 mil passive. All these properties are designed or bought to achieve that. So yeah, I'm as excited as you to see what happens, to be honest. But yeah, let's see.
Simon Loo from House Finder, thank you so much again, man.
Thank you so much for having me.